This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Welcome back, everybody. It is Friday, which means mail time, and we're going to do this a little bit differently today. So, full disclosure, both of these books actually came in last week. I was going through them. Both of these are extremely special. The work is so good that I want to do a little bit of a different format in this video today. So, typically, when I do a mail video, I will randomly grab 4 or 5 pieces of mail, and I just kind of improvise the whole video and open them. And when I want to change that up today and kind of do a deep dive on these and talk about why I think this work is so good. So because I opened these last week, I'm going to spare you all the ASMR package opening here, and we're just going to get right down to it. So first up is this book called Exodus, and this comes to us from Wilfred Wessel Berthleson, who lives in Norway. So this is very international today. We've got a book from Norway and another one from Germany. But I'm going to start with Exodus here, and Wilfred writes, "Hi Ted, I'm a big fan of your channel and your way of thinking and approach to photography. You have so many similarities with my mentor and Norway's most famous fine art photographer, Morten Korvgold. Look him up. This book you have received is my first book. It cost a lot of money and hard work, but certainly far from perfect, something a book probably never will be. I have now had 2 exhibitions, one in London in October of last year, and now at the Grieg Hall in Bergen. I had 20 pictures in large format and sold all but one. I tried to do something new and original with my photography, but as it is said, everything has been done before, so it's not easy to come up with something original, but I have tried as best I could. I've spent over 10 years on this project. I would appreciate your feedback and criticism, though that I can do better on my next book and get better. I'm working on several projects. I am a Leica photographer, and I only use one lens, a fixed 50mm. It's actually liberating to just have one lens. Then I do not have to spend time choosing. If you want to get closer, that's fine, just use your legs and walk. I will not spend more of your time, but if you like the book, then you just have to tell others about it. It would have been greatly appreciated. And when you meet Ralph Gibson again, say hello to him for me. I don't know that he remembers me, but I was at his workshop with him here in Norway in 2018. I think he liked what I was doing. I had been out one day and photographed at the workshop, and when I showed him the pictures that I had taken in the evening, there was especially a picture that he liked of mine. It was a nude on a mountain, and then he said, "You are a visual motherfucker." Okay, Wilfred, this is some beautiful work, and I want to go through and address a couple things he mentioned in his letter, and I want to talk about why I think this book is so good. So I think first, from a contextual standpoint, I think that clearly you see some modern influences in here. I would say Michael Kenna is a big influence. I would also say that I see a little bit of Hiroshi Sugimoto, not only in terms of the minimalist quality to the work. There's something that sort of reminds me with the out-of-focus stuff to maybe some of the Beyond Infinity architectural work that he did, as well as I think some of the dioramas that he did really early on. Now, none of this I don't think is a rip-off at all. I think it's influenced, but I think he takes it somewhere else, which is interesting because he says in his note that he's trying to do something new and original, but everything has been done before. Well, it comes down to the way that you do it and what it is that you have to say. And the first thing I love about this is how minimal all of these images are. We've reduced the subject matter just down to essentially ice, sky, and water, and some wildlife. So the penguin is featured pretty prominently throughout the course of the book. We also see the polar bear and some other birds as well, and there's a little bit in here where we get into power lines, but it's pretty minimal in terms of subject matter. Another thing that's really cool is because these are so minimal, it's reduced to just kind of the natural geometry of the scene that you're seeing, and then I love the fact that some of them are so minimal, and he places the subjects near the edges. This is something that I've talked about for years on this channel with composition videos, and this is a technique that you can use that really brings emphasis. Rather than having something near the middle of the frame, that's where you would expect it to be, it builds interest and builds emphasis of the subject when you put it close to the edge. Also interesting is the way this book progresses, and I know that he mentioned in here he did this over a number of years through many trips to Antarctica as well as some to the north, is that the style shifts a little bit into some really interesting work. We go from very sharp penguins that are in focus and kind of the conventional landscape at the beginning, but as we move through here, and I think he's making a statement with this, particularly in this chapter called Guardians of the Last Continent, where all of a sudden the penguins are out of focus, and we get that diorama feel because they're out of focus in the foreground, but the landscape is in focus in the background. There's obviously an implication of endangerment going on here, and I mean, it's very strong and very powerful. Another technique that Wilfred uses in here that I really like is playing with a very shallow depth of field, and the way that subjects kind of start falling on that transition where you're going from an in-focus area to an out-of-focus area. Of course, it helps to have a really nice lens to get this pulled off correctly, but it's a really powerful technique, and I think he's done done a really nice job with this book. Another thing that I want to address that I think is really important about this project, and Wilfred stated this in his letters, the whole idea of one camera and one lens. The 50 millimeter is a very interesting lens choice, and I think that you don't normally think of 50 millimeters when you're thinking of landscapes. Normally people would choose something wider in focal length, but I love that idea of the 50. And what I really see with this book is when you get rid of all the distractions. I mean, if you imagine him being out there and screwing around with changing lenses all the time, I don't think the work is going to have this kind of continuity to it. I think that clearly he's got a style that's embracing characteristics of the lens, and I think he's really starting to understand what it's going to do for him. And so there's some things that I really, really love about this book. Anyway, I think this is a really mature and really interesting project. I'm going to put a link to this in the show description. I think he put it in the note there, but I will find it either way. And if you guys want to go check this out for yourselves, it's really nicely printed. There's just a couple technical notes too. I mean, when you're going to go on a trip and do a project like this, and wasn't just one trip, he mentioned this was over a 10-year period of time, it's going to take a lot of time, and yeah, it's going to take coming up with a budget to get it done right, but the results are here, and this book is just beautiful. So next up, I've got a project that comes to us from Germany. This is a duo that put this together, and there's some really impressive work in here and some really interesting things that you don't see in a lot of places. But real quick, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor today, who are the awesome folks over at squarespace.com. Listen, you need a website, and we all know how much work that is to build and maintain, but it doesn't have to be. Squarespace is by far the easiest way to build your online presence. It's also the best way to grow a business that works for you without having to write a single line of code. Do you just need a simple portfolio or a blog to showcase your work? Well, Squarespace is perfect. Featuring a drag-and-drop interface, it's intuitive, it allows you to build galleries quickly and update your site with ease. Are you running a business? Well, Squarespace gives you additional tools for things like appointment scheduling, private member areas, social media tools, and even advanced email marketing. Do you sell products or services? Well, Squarespace has you covered with complete tools to power your store, from merchandising to checkout, so that you can sell, ship, and build your customer base. You can even sell classes or manage appointments through your website. And with Squarespace extensions, you can easily sync with third parties to manage, optimize, and enhance your website. From social media integration to SEO, Squarespace gives you all the tools you need to grow a business that works for you. So head over to Squarespace and sign up for the free trial. Start with one of their award-winning templates and see what you can create and just how good you're going to look. When you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/AOP and I can save you an additional 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Just use offer code AOP on checkout. So give it a try and see if Squarespace is right for you. And I want to give a special shout out and thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Okay, this is a very beautifully printed book. It is called I Never Knew If You Were the Storm or the Silence. And this comes to us from a duo. And it is Olaf Korbanek, who is the photographer, and Louise Lance, who is the model. They're both from Germany. And Olaf wrote me a nice letter in here, and I want to read this to you and show you some of the books. So he writes in here, Dear Ted, a friend of us gave us the hint to have a look at your YouTube channel. I have to admit that it was completely unknown to me, but since I've become very enthusiastic, especially your recent videos dealing with the non-technical content are especially what I love. As a photographer, be different, Ralph Gibson's on photo books. We like to widen our horizon as a photographer and model duo. You must be asking yourself, who is us, and why is this guy from Germany sending me these words? Well, we are Olaf Korbanek and Louise, and we cooperate as a photographer-model duo for nearly 4 years now. Just from the beginning, it was clear that we share a lot of interests and that we, despite our difference in age, gender, and status, are very similar when it comes to values, picture style, and photographic development. I do not know how it is in the US, but in Germany, a cooperation between the model and the photographer is rare. Mostly, it is the photographer who is well known, and he or she decides all of the aspects about all of the resulting pictures. The models are often replaceable, reduced to decorative accessory. When we first met, Louise made it clear that she wanted to be involved. She wanted to influence all aspects of the process. I was happy about this because it was exactly what I wanted to do. I love to develop ideas in a team, that is. What happened since? Well, we are a team. We are reading books, especially philosophical books from the French existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus. We discuss photo books, we visit art museums, we're always searching for new ideas and inspiration. After a while, we hated the idea that we put all these thoughts and enthusiasm into the pictures just for a like or a heart on Instagram. It's so sad because pictures deserve better, but that's how the photographic world has recently developed. Because of this, we decided 2 years ago to create a book just for the two of us. No hairstylist, no makeup artist, just two human beings loving art and creativity. 2 years later, we have finished the project. 40,000 images and 37 photo shoots and 2 shooting trips are now reduced to 236 pages. We hope that our aim to show different emotions, to tell stories, and to show a variety of styles, and to create a distinct mood is visible. If you like our approach, the book and the story behind it, we would be honored if you think it's worth mentioning on your YouTube channel. All of the best, and greetings from Germany, Olaf and Louise. Okay, first off, Olaf and Louise, this book is absolutely outstanding. I love what you're doing here, and you asked me if it was like this in the US. I don't know. Well, so there are collaborations that happen, but yes, it is very rare. And I would say, even on a global scale, worldwide, that usually there are collaborations. And I think that when you think of models, you typically move into the fashion industry. And I think there are pairings of photographers and models who work really well together and have a working relationship like that. But I've never seen anything on a project of this scale that is just this massive. And I think this is really interesting. And like I said, I just have never seen anything like this. And so I want to talk about that for just a second. So I like to approach the concept of creativity in a lot of the videos that I make. It's something that behind the scenes I'm constantly reading about, I'm constantly studying. It's something that's very much of interest to me. I think probably out of necessity, because I think I'm like everybody else. We tend to burn out sometimes. We're trying to decide something new. And when you're truly going into new territory, it becomes very difficult, especially when you're doing it by yourself. So one of the impressive things about this is the fact that you guys do have that collaboration going on. What I really love is you were talking about researching this together, visiting art museums, reading the same books, and I can see in these images that there is definitely a legitimate nod back to things that came before, but you're doing it in a modern and fresh way. And what I really love about this is this does not feel like fashion work to me. It actually feels like an art book. I love the fact that you mentioned in here, no hairstylist, no makeup artist. It has a very real feeling to it. It's not too slick. There's one thing that bugs me sometimes about art photography, especially when you do introduce that fashion element, is that a lot of times it just becomes overproduced and it does become slick. Now, I'm not knocking on that. There's a whole industry around that. There's makeup artists and there's people that do their job very well. But I'm just saying it's really nice to see something that's an alternative to a lot of those things. A couple of things I want to mention in here. One that's kind of interesting is there's certainly a nod to Cindy Sherman. I don't know whether that was intentional or not in these pictures, but because we have the same model putting on different outfits and looking essentially different in each one of these little vignettes in here, you do get that vibe to it. That's kind of as far as the influence goes, because I think they take it in their own direction very clearly on here. But the way this is set up is you essentially have variations with different poses in here. And I like this because it starts to give a little bit of a narrative and starts to tell us something that's a little more deep than just seeing one image. Another thing that I really love in here is the use of gesture with our model. And I love the way that her hands are posed at times and the way this actually interacts with the scene that's around her, the way the shadows fall, the way that light works. A lot of this is very high contrast, and in some cases it's very low key. In other words, we don't see a lot of bright highlights in a lot of these images. They're very dark, they're very dim, but it has a very moody emotional effect to it. It's really nicely done. It also kind of harkens a little bit of, like, if you look at earlier pictorialism in some cases, like the works of Anne Brigman, let's say, and the whole idea of the female and the landscape. Hers were self-portraits like Cindy Sherman, and that's not what we have here. And this is definitely a way more modern interpretation. But I like the fact that there is a nod to some of the history that's come before it. And of course, there's a 1950s noir look to a lot of these that's very effectively pulled off. It's never very campy. It's always very well thought out. Another thing that I like that Olaf is doing from a technical standpoint, and this kind of relates to what I was talking about with the other book here as well, but he's shooting a lot with a very shallow depth of field, and he's been using this to a really nice effect. And obviously he's got a really nice lens that he's using, whatever it is. But when we see that shallow depth of field and the way that the contrasts work, I don't get the same feel that you see with a lot of work that litters Instagram, where your model's in focus and your background is blown out. Even though that's sort of what's happening on here, it's much more tastefully done, and I think the use of contrast, and this is something that a mature photographer does, comes into relationship there. And as I mentioned, I mean, there's a couple examples that I can think of, but I love the cross-discipline idea of it's not two photographers working together. It's a photographer and a model. The model is going to inform you, if you're willing to listen, in directions and ways that you're not going to think of naturally on your own, and I think as a photographer, it's something that working with a model, you're going to be able to bring a lot of aesthetic to the table too. So it's a really interesting collaboration. I absolutely love this book. And again, I will put a link to the book in the show description. I highly recommend you guys go check this out. So a little bit different format today I wanted to try out, where I actually kind of dove in and talked about these a little bit, because I think these were points worth emphasizing. I think there's something that I wanted to share with everybody, because I think as artists, this is where we start to learn from things. And so I might try to mix this in every now and then when we do mail time videos. But if you have any questions, drop them in the comments. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Until then, later.